Hello and welcome to the Quilting Water Project panel. It is now my privilege to introduce you to our final presenters. Please feel free to write any questions you may have in the Q&A. I'm certain that during their presentations, our speakers, Cherita Harrell and Jacob Camacho, will share with you how to receive further information, should you have interest, and about how you might become involved in this brilliant project. So after reading their short bios, I will fade into the background and turn the remainder of this session over to them. Cherita Harrell earned a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writings at Rutgers University, Camden, and a Master of Science in Education at Walden University. She is a doctoral candidate at Walden University, and her research interests include a focus on critical literacy, racial literacy, and Black feminism. Her research examines how critical literacy, racial literacy, and critical theory may help to create spaces that allow for the exploration of students' lived experiences through forms of expression such as oral histories, narratives, visual media, and other literary contributions. In her free time, she writes fiction, and her work has been published in Decades Review, Minetta Review, and The Bleeding Lion. Born and raised in Guahan, Islas Marianas, Jacob is a Chamorro writer, educator, and activist. He received his creative writing MFA from Rutgers University, Camden, and is an alumnus of the University of Guam and UCLA's Extension Writers Program. Currently, he is an assistant professor of creative writing at Stockton University. Previously a lead teacher at All Things Are Possible Foundation in Willingboro, New Jersey, he is a co-founder of the Move Mountains Project in San Luis, Colorado. He is a former English teacher at Philadelphia's Alternative High School, PADI, and an academic coach for New Jersey's YMCA of Burlington and Camden counties. His fiction and poetry have been featured in the University of Guam's Press Storyboard 18, Philadelphia's Madhouse magazine, University of Hawaii Press's Indigenous Literatures from Micronesia and Manoa, a Pacific Journal of International Writing, and Philadelphia's Moonstone Arts Center's 2022 Featured Poets Anthology. He has also written a collection of stories, conversations, for the mobile app Trail Off, that provides a platform for underrepresented stories in which audiences can listen to while navigating hiking trails within and around Philadelphia. Camacho is currently working on the manuscript for his book, Hawk Boy. And now I will turn the proverbial mic over to Cherita.
Thank you, Rosemarie. Thank you so much for that introduction. So I am Cherita Harrell. I am an associate artist with the Quilting Water Project. It is a privilege to be here with you all today at this important conference and an honor to discuss quilting water. The Quilting Water Project emerged from the collective work of a group of artists at the Institute for the Study of Global Racial Justice at Rutgers University, Camden. The project is an international public art initiative that will culminate in a collaborative lyric document containing oral and visual records of water around the world. International documentation began in Camden, New Jersey, and will include a digital archive, an exhibition, a book comprised of images and oral accounts of water gathered from around the world, and quilted accounts of water. The final portion includes a community of Black quilters from Camden County, where Rutgers Camden is located, who will make quilts in response to the oral histories from their own city and those collected globally. Additionally, the Institute will acquire textiles from partner sites so that the quilting artists will integrate them into their quilting water works. We call the project Quilting Water because our stories of water can be stitched together much like a quilt. By naming it Quilting Water, we not only honor the connected stories of water, but we also honor the New Jersey artists who are making quilts in conversation with these stories from around the world. The project not only collects local stories and histories about water, but it also establishes the connection between literature, culture, and ecological crises impacting citizens worldwide. The project also demonstrates the importance of formal and informal rituals and the necessity of gathering, collecting, storytelling, and communing around mutual experiences and topics. It is this in particular that helps to establish the complexities of literature, or as Young et al. Describes, as a creative, factual, and imaginative work about people and what they have done, believe, and have created or are willing to create. And it applies a balanced representation of the realities of human existence. Quilting Water acknowledges new literary forms through the digital gathering of stories, but it also preserves the oldest forms of literature through the interview itself as a method of oral tradition. The project allows one form to preserve the soulfulness of the other by highlighting the idea that the soul and lifeblood of literature, the crafting and designing of oral and written histories, occurs when ordinary people are in conversation with one another. Quilting Water is not only a gathering of quilting communities, but also an artifact of people getting together around these rituals of sharing news, knowledge, grief, and forms of celebration that build and construct literature that we have acknowledged for centuries. So if it's okay, I would like to share a reflection that explores my personal relationship with water. It's titled Water as Witness, the Significance of Water in Our Shared Histories. I heard once that we began with water, that we were birthed by water. And while my specific memories of water began with play, with water balloons, muddy puddles, garden hoses, and summer swimming in neighborhood lakes, my connection to water, much like many of our histories, began with the ocean. The history and brutality of the Middle Passage flow through my veins. It is the constant and persistent echo of my ancestors. As a Black woman, or as I am categorized in the United States, an African-American woman, I recognize my relationship with water, how my parents' relationship with water. My father grew up near one of the Great Lakes, and my mother grew up near the Savannah River, a port for the transatlantic slave trade, and how my children's relationship with water, the two of them grew up near the Atlantic Ocean, have all been framed by this significant moment in our shared histories that many would like to erase, that many have tried to erase. But much like water, it continues. Patrick Rizal, a former teacher, mentor, and dear friend, shared during a conversation the beauty and necessity of quilting water. I was struck and moved by many aspects of the project, but what impacted me the most was the idea of water as memory and its importance beyond just a resource or element, which of course are both deeply important, but specifically its importance as a source of reflection, of storytelling, of sharing, listening, and witnessing, of remembering. In her essay, The Site of Memory, Toni Morrison wrote, "You know they straighten out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is the word they use, but in fact, it is not flooding. It is remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Writers are like that, remembering where we were, that valley we ran through, what the banks were like, the light that was there, and the route back to our original place. It is emotional memory, what the nerves and the skin remember, as well as how it appeared. And a rush of imagination is our flooding. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. I have many memories of water. I remember it was my father who made sure I knew how to swim, who took me to lakes the color of rust and to pools of chlorinated water and entrusted me with strangers who waited patiently until my sinking became floating and then swimming. Perhaps he did this because he wanted me to learn a way of survival that he had never learned. Like so many Black elders and ancestors, my parents never learned how to swim, but his persistence in ensuring I learned how to navigate water was a gift that I eventually shared with my own children. I remember a trip to Salobreña, Spain, where I washed my feet in the Mediterranean Sea, a body of water with its own history connected to Black bodies. And I remember a trip to Dakar, Senegal, in particular to Gorée Island, a port for the transatlantic slave trade, and a trip that in many ways left me broken. Goree Island is situated on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. It is a body of water where, on the other side of that same ocean, as a Jersey girl, I have placed every inch of my Black body in its water too many times to count. These trips in many ways remind me of what Morrison said about the perfect memory of water and how it constantly tries to return to where it was. Much like water in our histories, connected or otherwise, I hold these memories in my body. I hold quilting water as a powerful symbol of the connection between memory and witnessing, the connection between the stories of our ancestors, the cycle of life and death, and a return to our histories. Or maybe it's an honoring of our histories, because after all, we began with water, we were birthed by water, and through this project, we return to it through our sharing, our listening, and our reflecting on its power to shape and echo our cultural and spiritual beliefs, traditions, and identities. So I wanted to talk about the interviews for Quilting Water. Ordinary people create literature too, whether through movies, books, or other forms of storytelling. Everyday stories come from everyday people. We view the interviews as a process of telling and retelling, of hearing and listening, of reflecting and wishing. We also view the interviews as a way to think about our collective sharing, experiencing, and storytelling through both literature and culture. We have now collected stories about water from Indigenous communities, including members of the Nancy Copeland I Lenape tribal nation in New Jersey. We have also collected stories from other areas in the United States, as well as other countries, such as South Africa, Somalia by way of Italy and Belgium, the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, Sri Lanka, Senegal, and other parts of the world, such as Puerto Rico. Our plan is to expand our efforts in the Pacific, Latin America, and in Europe, as well as continue to archive interviews from numerous regions in Asia and Africa. And I wanted to share, if we have time for two of the interviews that capture this collective sharing of memories related to water. This first interview is by Toni Giselle Stewart, who is a South African healer, poet, performer, and educator. Record. Okay. Okay, hello. I am here with Toni Giselle Stewart, poet and healer, and she is going to answer some questions for the Quilting Water Project. Hi, Toni.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for doing this again. I really appreciate it. So the first question that I have, and what I'll do as I ask the questions, I'm not gonna say anything in between. I'm just gonna ask them and let you talk. So you'll hear me ask the question, then I'll just be quiet, okay? Okay. What is one memory you have of water?
Oh, there's so many. In 2009, I was running an after-school youth program in an area called Hout Bay, and I was leaving. It was kind of my last session with them because I was leaving to go start my own organization. And we decided they live in Hout Bay, which is a fishing village. And what's interesting about Hout Bay is that it's almost a microcosm of South Africa's segregation. So the kind of Creole fishing community is right on the mountain behind the harbor. And then the kind of Xhosa, Shona kind of South African community is further outside of the town, kind of on the hill near the mountain, on the completely opposite side. And in the middle is the village where kind of all the kind of white folk and the rich folk and the foreigners are. And we were on the beach and we were having this kind of farewell day on the beach. And while we were there, we noticed that there were 3 girls drowning in the water. And what was happening was they were being caught in the riptide. And the young kind of men who were teenagers in this program jumped in the water to get them out. And I did as well, but I didn't have a swimming costume. I hadn't planned to swim, so I was in thick corduroy trousers and a t-shirt. Went in, and I don't know if you've ever kind of been in the water with people who are drowning, but they panic, and so they use you as leverage. And so here was this really young girl, 2, I think, in fact, who were so panicked that they were pushing me under, and I didn't. And because they had that kind of like fear strength, there's a particular kind of strength you get when you're in that fear place. They were pushing me down as a way of keeping themselves up. And the thing about riptides is the more you fight, the more it pulls you in. And so I remember being underwater at one point, and I remember saying, and I think at the time I was 26. And I remember at the time saying, like, it's not my time. I know there are things I have to do still. And if I survive this, I'll do those things. Not knowing at the time what those things were, but just had this very clear sense. And the way that I managed to get out is that some of the guys had saved like one or two of the other girls already, and then had come back in to help. And because they'd helped to get them out, I could then swim back to shore. So it feels really significant because a year ago I initiated as a healer, and I'm initiated in what's known as the water medicine tradition of my ancestors. And what's really interesting is that the water will find and call you whether you are aware of it or not. And when it is your time to go home, home being returning to what you know and returning to the wisdoms and the ancestral knowledge that runs through you, you will go home. And I think that feels significant because my initiation happened at the water, pretty much on the shore between the sand and the water, covered in water in a way, walking into the water. And even before I knew that I was to be initiated, I'd gotten up. I was kind of preparing to go and live in Kenya for 6 months to be with my partner, and I could feel it was just 6 months, but I could feel it was a big move, and because I really do work with the ancestors and work with the land spiritually, I know that you do everything as ceremony and everything as ritual. And so I'd started in the February. One morning I woke up and I was like, oh, I need to do 100 days of sunrise. And I would every day for 100 days. I get up before dark, go to the beach, watch first light come in, watch the sunrise, pray, meditate. And for the first 2 weeks, I went to a local tidal pool because I live near the sea. And then one day I kind of turned to my housemate and I was like, we need to go to this other beach. We just need to go there. And then we went there for the rest of the time. And that ended up being where I had my initiation. It ended up being my spiritual home. And so the way that the water will call you, and how there are ways of knowing that are beyond logic. And that's what the water brings, is a different way of knowing and remembering.
What is one story or myth you received about water?
This is a really good one. So I think the first one that I encountered was the story of the sealskin, soulskin of Salki, the Salki woman. So the woman who lives under, the woman who's a seal. It's kind of like, I think in the Celtic tradition, but I read it in Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Women Who Run with the Wolves. And so it's the story of this woman who is actually a seal, but when she comes on land, she's able to take off her seal coat and she's woman. And so she gets, I think she gets ensnared in a fisherman's net, and he takes her home. And he kind of, falls in love with her, and she falls in love with him. But she knows she has to go back, And so this thing of having to slip on her coat for long enough in order to be able to come topside. And I remember it standing out because of this notion of, where do women go when they need to return to their own inner world and their own underworld? The place that nourishes them, but the place that has been demonized by the kind of modern society that we live in. The place of the wildness, the place of deep knowing that cannot be explained. So that's kind of one story of water. And then a different one that I don't know well, but a Khoi elder kind of talks about the story of Camacho, which is this serpent that lives under the ocean that's kind of a deity in the Khoi and the San tradition. And I don't know any of the details. That's kind of as much as I know.
What has water given you?
Sure. Everything. Everything. Home and healing from grief and returning to myself and seeing who and what I am and love and everything.
What has water taken away?
Grief and pain, wounding, all that I am not and all that I am. Yeah, just all of the layers that I carried, all of the masks that I carried to be acceptable in the world. And all the kind of wounding and trauma that I carried that was not mine and was never mine to carry.
What is one dream or wish that you have for water?
That we will remember her as our first mother, and that we will remember a time when we breathed underwater, because we did, that we will remember that every single being that lives beneath the water is our sibling, and that in remembering this and remembering this time, we will return to her with the sacredness and with the care and with the respect and the love that she is worthy of. Because in doing that, all of the answers of the kind of physical, environmental things can be answered.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to end the recording now. And I wanted to share a second interview. This one is by Peter Latafay, who is a student at the university in Dakar, Senegal, and his interview is in Sada.
Mahen na Pierre Latir Fay gen Senegal no sate fena layel Sanyara.
What is one memory you have of water?
O fofina arefa ge anona ka jebi njeriñ mak kam no ñew no kin lam wajiro fi dara o jaga ngiro o fofi ndiki tan refu ke anona ten iyera ten ingota mu indef na ina ngambia ku imbia ga ay soxla o fofi ten taxu o fofi a jego njeriño makam kin mi fa xores om ga nga o kina yaqa o fofi ka do maham la mu fofi ka def ke andona ka waro to hel o sagum a def ke andona tamit o kina nanga jefandikor an ta an ne ta fitan lam ka def ke andona o mbaax ino lam ro jow ino fofi to fofi a refa ke andona ka jego njiriñ no ñew no kin.
What is one story or myth you have heard about water?
O fofi na a jega feleng ga o kin ta wetoro binaleten comme ne ilayan a innaga kaga dum aham torop ram kan foguye ande ke o fofi o jer keref na o njeriñ fofi ten tax o yeta yaqa o fofi le nda a an anga o njeriño fofi kon yakko geran kaga dal a refa ge anona a marqué aham no fofi feleng.
What has water given you?
nen kenena ka ref ke anona le manum mbodjuk sax rama fofi ka jego njeriñ ka ref ke anona in teni sohla a chaque jour ku mbiya fe nu refna kay sohla a o fofi ndiki o fofi a refa ke anona imbage mbi dara ram njega ngeran imbage aɗa o fofi hane wa kewƴimo gar mene lam wa kima ɓogu wa kima mukto tan tahu bo o foofi aɗa fakki anona ka jogo jereñ donc ndiki o foofi tan refuki anona o foofi aɗa fakki anona ten ɗi moƴƴi sohla kamo ñow in.
What is water taken away?
Kaga na aɗa fakki anona mi ka ɗo maham torop ka ɗo maham layanum ndiki lam o foofi ware ɓangel o foofi o kin warirano hot sax a ɓangan nene mbat a jëfandikoo tan ne andona refe naga lamo foofi ka ref ke andona o kin nde waage fi dara a jegange o foofi nda o ga'anga mi fa xooxe som ga'anga xa andona ka damo foofi a ɓangan mbat a jëfandikoo tan no andona refe naga mi ka ɗoma xam lam xane o ɗetanga kam saate fe in Sénégal a maya caate mayu ka andona njegeyo o foof xoolu to xane a mbug'anga xana jeg o foofi xoolu bo da mbaago yara o foofi o xoolu comme ne wino fop kam adna fe nda o nanga xalata wene fop andona njegero o foofi xoolu kon o foofi nanga ɓangel mba ta yaqel xano an ne wene ga andeyo rek ten taxu da mbiya kene.
What is one dream or wish you have for water?
Xane mi ken moƴna ref o ngalates no foofi ten refu ga'e ram mi kan layka no Sénégal ga'e saate ke fop a njego foofi lam xane o retanga kam adna ne fop a jega mayu wo ndagno o foofi nda o garanga saate fe in Sénégal a jega caate mayu ka andona njege o foofi mi sañ'anga organisation maak ke fop da ndamta in bo Sénégal mu o retona kam Sénégal o jego foofu xoolu lam a refa probléme ne andona ino ga i njegin meke surtout Afrique caate ke andona kom ne den fode naga voilà.
Thank you. So in practice, Quilting Water engages scholars, artists, and communities across racial and geographic boundaries, centering our ecological urgencies and expanding our conception of storytelling. Because as Young et al. Writes, culture embodies the way humans live with and treat others and how they develop or react to changes in their environments. Our interviews and programming are occasions for gathering. More importantly, they are a collaboration with communities that comprise both our planetary memory and global literature through a myriad of literacies and a multitude of ecologies. And I wanted to leave you all with a video, a short video by Patrick Rizal, who is the co-director of the Institute and creator of Quilting Water, as he discusses how others can participate in this collective sharing.
The biggest need that will be coming up over the next few months and over the course of the academic year are people to conduct interviews. You know, like, this is such an easy process. All you need is your phone or a voice recorder or a computer or a tablet, and you just go and you take these 5 questions with you and you record either by video or audio what somebody's answers are.
And I will drop all of that information in the chat. Thank you. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jacob Camacho.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I want to echo Cherita's thanks to Rosemarie. I appreciate you allowing us to be here today. Cherita, that was a beautiful presentation, and I'm humbled to have witnessed it. Like, my heart is full. Yeah. So, as a, how can I start this? As a Indigenous Chamorro, Western Pacific Islander, I thought it best to follow up Cherita's presentation in the vein of storytelling. And because of the limited time that we have here on the panel, I would like to share a story about water that is most sacred to me. So being originally from Guam, a lot of us, right, we don't need to be Chamorro, but if you live in the Pacific, a lot of us learn how to swim early on. And as a child, around when I was like 9 years old, I was with my cousin Alan, and we swam out to this bay on the island where they had like floating platforms, and the ladders, you could suspend the ladder to reach this platform and things like that. When it was low tide, the platform will sink onto these pillars. And then when it's high tide, they will lift off of the pillars and they will float freely. So it was kind of it's kind of dangerous to be around there during high tide. High tide came in. My cousin Alan's 4 years older than me. He's Chamorro, he's Filipino, and high tide comes in. He goes, Jake, it's time to go in, right? And I wanted to bask in the sun. I wanted to stay in the sun all day. And I said, no, I'll linger a bit. And by the time he had reached the shore, I was already floating off of the platform. The tide was coming in rough. I slipped out to my side, and the current ripped me underneath this platform, and I was stuck underneath it. There was no way for me to escape save for placing my fingers into the holes and kind of climbing out. Once I did, I kicked myself free and swam my way to the shore. I'm sharing this story for a specific reason. I want to share how the Pacific has kind of nurtured me and how the Atlantic continues to humble me. So I fast forward, like after college, I lose my cousin Alan to him spearfishing one night in the island of Saipan. It's the 4th island in the Marianas Islands in our archipelago. And he went spearfishing one night with 2 friends during a typhoon. There's something special to be said about water, right? Like, we know it's dangerous to go spearfishing out there, but the ocean comes alive in a very beautiful way during a typhoon, during a hurricane. Like, underneath it, there's so much life that roams freely. Alan saw that as an opportunity to go spearfishing. And as in Cherita's first story, he tried to swim up through a canal, but the canal kept spitting him back out, and eventually it swallowed him. There's something to be said, yeah. Like, Alan died doing what he loves. That boy loved to fish, loved to, whether he was in Hawaii or if he was in Guam. Fast forward to today, 2 years ago, I go out surfing in the down at Crystals Beach in Atlantic City, and I asked my Alexa what the weather is, and Alexa tells me that the winds are coming in onto shore at 52 miles per hour. And in my ignorance, right, I said, oh, this is great for waves. And so I go out and I swim to the break, or I paddle to the break. And once I pass the break, there's no waves. The water is extremely choppy, but there's no waves. And when I turn around, I noticed that I had, the water had taken me out into open ocean, and the shore was at least over a quarter mile away. I panic. Yeah, it's cold, it's winter. I'm in my wetsuit from head to toe. I'm the only surfer out there, the only person in the water on the beach out there. I paddle back, and that's my first mistake. I feel like as an islander, even as folks who are familiar with the water, you don't swim directly to the shore. The current will push you away. It gassed me out. On my second attempt, I realized this, and I started to swim diagonally. My elders had taught me in a rough current to swim in zigzags towards the ocean, towards the shore, right? And on that attempt, it gassed me out. And I brought myself close to a jetty, like a stone's throw away from the jetty. And I couldn't even lift my upper body from my board anymore. And the ocean took me back out. And at this point, the water, the pending storm started to intensify, and waves were breaking sporadically throughout the water. I knew that on my third attempt in, I needed to make it. I had no more energy, and no one's out there. Nobody knows, right? And I gassed out again, right? And as I lay on my board, I accepted that I was going to die, because there's nothing I could physically do that's, And And right there on the rock on the jetty, I could see it like maybe about 50 feet away from where I was on the jetty. I don't know if it was panic. I don't know if this was spiritual or what, but I immediately envisioned my cousin Alan seated on the peak of the jetty. And he told me, right, he's like, what are you doing? You know, in Chamorro, he's like, right? Like, what are you doing? You're pretty stupid right now. And he said, relax, right? Don't panic. And I'm not exaggerating when I say like I accepted death at that point, because even then, you know, visioning him had no energy, nothing. And this wave came up over my shoulder, and the swell was probably maybe like 7 feet, not too big, not too crazy, but I knew that if it hit me, it'll throw me off my board and into the choppy water. And I cannot stress how much I had expelled all my energy, because even if it did, I wouldn't have energy to pull my board or anything. And I put my head down, and all I could think about up to that point was how much I had valued and wasted life. And the wave didn't break. Instead of the swell capping, it nudged me and took me right to the jetty. And my body was thrown onto the jetty in like the most gentlest way possible. And I stuck my elbows and all my limbs into it. And after I was snug into the rocks, like I was pounded with wave after wave after that. And I feel like I probably stayed there for at least 15 minutes because I had no strength. When I came up, and I finally came up and I let my board go to thrash on the rocks, all I could think was how ignorant I have been and how water has helped teach me a lesson of how ignorant I have been, not only in water, but in life. I come to the top, and the storm has hit the beach pretty hard, right? The water has flooded the shore. It's spilling underneath the boardwalk. It's going into the streets of Atlantic City. And on a funny note, when I came up on top of the rock, there's this couple, and their 2 children. I'll never forget that the man was taking pictures and video because the ocean was so intense, right? It was so rough. And when he saw me climb up over the rocks, he screamed, and he's like, "Hoi!" And he grabbed his wife, and his kids saw me and they ran, you know. And then the wife looked at me, and then they both like briskly walked away. And even in that moment, I found it funny that all this turmoil can be going on around us. Like the real threat could be going on around us. And I'm just looking to survive. And that frightened them. Water in that day taught me many things, yeah. But I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say, don't go out alone. So as a Chamorro, right? The next day, I went to the same spot, and it might seem weird how I behave. This behavior might seem weird here in the East Coast of the United States, but as a Chamorro, I felt like I needed to honor, right, those who had died in the Atlantic, specifically, like Cherita just mentioned, the Middle Passage, and I felt like though they are not my ancestors, they saw this ignorant Pacific Islander out there and gave me a nudge, you know. So I went to go say thanks. And wouldn't you know it, right? The water, the ocean that day was as calm as ever, looked like a lake. And when Pat Rosal approached us about water and this quilting water project, I said, man, this must, the ancestors must be speaking and working with one another because everything seems to fit in place, quilt in place, right? Pun totally intended. So with that being said, I want to pass it back to Cherita if she has any other comments or anything she'd like to share.
Thank you, Jacob. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think maybe now we're ready for Q&A, Rosemarie.
I'm here, and I'll begin with my first question because I'm mesmerized, speechless. So that's why it took me so long. And well, I have to say I'm very proud because this is coming through my home school, Rutgers Camden, right? And so these are my people that that are sharing with us here. So I'm just so grateful for your conversation. And if there's another way, or do we have links in the chat to make sure that people know how to reach you if they're interested?
Yeah, I did put a link to the project. I'm also going to throw in my email address. So if folks want to figure out how to kind of conduct interviews or speak with me about how to do interviews, please reach out to me. My email's in the chat, and I'll definitely be happy to kind of coordinate that.
Yeah, and of course, if there's any way that the BGHRA can host something on our website that allows our folks to learn about this amazing project. I just have to make a note here and ask a question. Well, here's my question first, and then I'll make a comment about it. The young man who spoke in Seria from Dakar, his last name is Fai, all right?
Latify, yeah.
Latify, okay. Yeah, I'd like to know what why you elected to not have a translation available for the viewer. I think I kind of know the answer, but I'd like to let you have an opportunity to share that with our audience.
So that day I had actually did several interviews. I did some in Wolof and oh my gosh, my memory, Mandika, Seta, French and English. So there were multiple interviews in different languages that we did in Dakar that day. We are working on getting those transcribed, but there was just something about that experience of having him communicate in that particular language. And I don't speak it at all. But there was still this kind of, in some ways, understanding and feeling in the moment that felt really true to what this project is trying to capture and represent. And I even kind of noticed, like, I've watched this a few times. And again, I do not speak this language, but I knew when he was like kind of ending his thought, like when he was closing out what he was saying, and there wasn't, you know, these kind of like awkward pauses or anything where I was just like, is he done? So there was kind of a rhythm and music that happened with it that I think is important for other folks to experience in the ways in which I experienced it in the moment. I'm not going to say that I, you know, understood, you know, what he said, but there was a feeling that I felt helped me to kind of understand what he was communicating about his experience with water. And I do, you know, recognize that having it transcribed is important, but I think it's also important for people to kind of have that experience as well.
I think it's beautiful on all accounts. I think that it's moving to allow a person to express their feelings in the language that's most comfortable for them, as well as for us to experience that and to learn. We've spoken a lot this conference about languages and how languages are prioritized even in education. We will learn Sarah or Wolof at Rutgers, right? Why? You know, so that's one thing. And one last question, well, another question from me, and I hope others do have questions that they will pose. The first video, I'm sorry that I forgot her name, but again, mesmerized by her conversation. How do you choose people? Did you just sort of happen upon meeting this person? Because
Yeah.
she was so eloquent, and I mean, it just seemed like it was divinely designed, as I always say, that you should happen upon this testimony.
Yeah, I will say, and I tease Pat about this all the time. Patrick Rizal, of course, again, as I mentioned, is the co-director and the person who's created Quilting Water. I say that he is a magician. He in some ways is able to kind of find a way to connect us all. And it's so funny because you know, Jake and I, we met for the first time in his class, in Pat's class, at Rutgers, back in, what was that, Jake, like 2014? It's been a long time. And somehow, just like through Pat, we came together and you know, we're able to form this friendship and this, you know, partnership and writing and storytelling over time. Pat had put me in contact with someone who was teaching in New York, who knew another South African writer, poet, and healer. And I interviewed her first, Vangile Gansho, and she put me in contact with Toni Giselle Stewart. So in some ways, it's kind of this game of, you know, telephone, to be, you know, really basic in the explanation. But I think that's the beauty of this project, is we're connecting through our shared kind of relationships and connections. You know, through Jake, I'm able to hear stories from Guam, and, you know, through me, he's able to hear stories about, you know, this Jersey girl, you know, who, you know, kind of swims in the Atlantic Ocean. So we're all kind of connected in these various ways, and that connection has built the more that we are connected to other people, and it's created that collective sharing that I think is at the core of this project. So it is all by chance. It is all by fate, if you will. It is all by just these connections that were meant to be established.
Well, I'll add to that, because I also met Jake in Pat Rozelle's class at Rutgers.
A magician. He's a magician.
All of us meeting each other through Pat, who just happens is also a bit of magic, because we know he's there's no word to really describe Pat, huh, Jake? But I would like to ask you how, I know how you came to Rutgers, I know how you came to, but how did you come to this program? How did they find you? And what moves you in your involvement? Obviously your story that had me on edges. I just kept telling myself as you were explaining, but he's still here, but he's still here, because I was so afraid, you know, as you were explaining. But what brings you to the project, and why is it so meaningful to you?
I believe because oh my, like, to say it simply, it's gonna sound so corny, but you know, it really is life. I see the questions in the chat. I want to address them, but someone had mentioned limited access, right? And I feel like, because I feel like today, simply said, water is hugely, immensely taken for granted, you know? It's almost, it's like there's two sides of the coin, right? There are places in the world that have limited to zero access to water. And then there are places in the world where water is literally destroying their homes and their livelihood, you know? Like, I could speak about Detroit and how their water has been abused, is the word I would say, right? I could talk about Hawaii and Saipan, how the US military had punctured our aquifers, and now all our waters are poisoned with lead, and we don't have any clear water. I could talk about global warming and how there are several thousands of islands in the Pacific that now they're not sinking, right? But their water levels are rising literally right into the living room, destroying their livelihood. So it's it forces your respect, yeah. And when something forces our respect, it forces our attention, and we cannot think about anything else at that moment. No, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. I mean, we're not we're not in any way only trying to kind of romanticize these relationships with water. We are certainly considering all of the impacts of water across the world. And Pat talks about this in one of his interviews where he, immediately has thought about Camden and Rahway and Flint and other areas in the world where, water has been a huge impact against the people who occupy those areas. So we definitely are aware and considering in our conversations with other folks and the ways in which they're telling their stories, how, one, how beautiful water is and how it is this kind of, shared memory and shared resource, but also how it can be devastating in a lot of areas too.
There's this other question. I'm sorry, did you want to say anything before I answer? Someone says, how did I manage to get out of the water? Every time a wave would hit me, I was underwater. So I would have to hold my breath. And I used all energy to do that. I feel like because I grew up with the privilege of like free diving and swimming in deep water, even though I was being thrashed by it, I was still relatively calm and relaxed, And once I had enough strength, I climbed up, and I climbed up like this, and my body was trembling because I was so weak. When I got back to my house, I drank a whole gallon of water, and I called my brothers immediately. And this is my like 10 years older brothers and 12-year older brothers. My 10-year-old brother said, "Very good, Jacob. That's Darwinism in its fullest effect. Nobody told you, right, to go out in the water like that." But yeah, that's why I wanted to share that story, right? Because water took away something so precious to me. It took away my cousin, and then at the same time, it also taught me a lot about my decisions in life.
Can either of you tell us something about the actual quilt and how far along you are in the project and when that and how that will materialize?
So we're still at beginning stages with the quilt. We've met with the quilters who are going to be starting to kind of stitch together these stories. And they are, just the person who is running it, Renata, is just a beautiful person. I've not had an opportunity to meet her yet, but from what I've heard from Patrick, she's just an absolutely beautiful person, and is kind of overseeing this group of quilters who are very eager to begin stitching together these stories. So we're still in early days with that. Hopefully we'll have more in the coming months. But I just know, based on kind of like what he said about her in this process and these quilters and their enthusiasm, that it's going to be something really wonderful to witness.
Well, I'm excited, and I'll be bothering you because, I want to be involved and learn more, and I want to see how things are going. So if we don't have any other questions from the audience, do you have any last words that you would like to share before we end, either of you?
Jake?
Uh-oh, we do have something.
Yeah, question.
A question just appeared well, let's read some of the comments in the chat. One, Beatrice Cox said, "I moved to no end. Thank you for this presentation." Wow. And Steffi says, "I was wondering if water is often misunderstood as a connector to the subconscious when conducting interviews. I'm asking because it is sometimes portrayed in this way in films."
I don't know if I completely understand what you're asking, but in terms of it being a connector, I've conducted a lot of the interviews, and what I think is really powerful in understanding this kind of connection and water are the ways, obviously the ways in which we all are, talking about our shared histories and our experiences, our individual experiences, but more importantly, the ways in which we're connecting with our memories of water, and how, in a lot of ways, even though they are, very different, are still kind of coming together in this understanding of how powerful and impactful, how important water is in each of our lives. And I talked about this a little bit in my reflection, is that this idea of water as witness in our shared histories, how I can be this Jersey girl you know, who has had my specific experiences with the Atlantic Ocean, and then Jake, as you know, a person from Guam, you know, has his specific relationship with water in the Atlantic Ocean. How my parents, you know, my mother from Georgia, my father from Ohio, have their very specific relationship with water, but in some ways, it all kind of connects through our shared histories, through our cultural histories, through our understanding of just like literature as a being beyond just like books and words, but human experiences. So for me, I think that that is something that I've heard kind of, if I could say that there's maybe not necessarily a theme, but a thread throughout all of these interviews, is that even though we have these very separate and individual experiences, in some ways they connect.
Daryl asks if you have stories from hurricane survivors from the Caribbean, and Steffi thanks you.
Not yet, but Daryl, if you know some folks, please reach out to me via email. I would love to speak with them. Jake, I don't know if you wanted to add anything about the connected experiences or anything.
No, that one's tough to answer, but I'll say this: I feel like as humans, we all have some relation with water, and I think that's definitely something where most of the people they'll tap into when these questions are asked, right? I met people out here in Jersey, I met people out here in New York who's never been to the beach out here. You know, I met people out here who's never crossed from Jersey into Philly, the Benjamin Franklin, and that goes over the Delaware River, right? Like, there's something to be said about ourselves, you know, and why we choose, you know, to navigate around or near water a certain way, you know. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know, but I do believe the survivors of the hurricanes are a necessity, right? Cannot tell this story without including their stories as well.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way of saying it. We can't tell all the stories unless we, you know, speak to as many different people in different regions and areas, those who have beautiful experiences with water and those who do not. And that's the importance of this project. We're not, again, trying to only speak to a certain pocket of individuals in the world. We want to hear, you know, the stories of whomever will share them with us. So.
Beautiful. Are there any other questions before we close? I would just like to also say that I think that this was a perfect way to end our conference. Our next session is actually our closing. And I think as quilting tends to do, it sort of brings us all together. And what we are celebrating this year, last year we celebrated the 10th anniversary. This year we're celebrating, I guess you would call it the BGHRA homecoming, because we are now permanently a fixture of Rutgers, so I'll be around. So I'm so grateful that we could collaborate in this way. And I look forward to seeing you next year and in the future. And if you'd like, please join us next in our closing. I'd be grateful to have you. And please reach out to me to let me know how the BGHRA can support this initiative further. And to our audience, thank you for coming. And we look forward to seeing you shortly. Bye-bye.